In 1856, the California goldfields held promise and peril in equal measure. The mountain settlement of Grass Valley, nestled in Nevada County, existed as little more than a collection of weathered cabins and makeshift claims scattered along Deer Creek. The pine-covered hills echoed with the constant sound of pickaxes striking stone and the occasional rumble of ore carts along wooden tracks. It was here, among the desperate fortune-seekers and their families, that one of the most methodical acts of betrayal in frontier history would unfold. Martha Wilson arrived in Grass Valley during the autumn of 1855, accompanying her husband Daniel Wilson and his mining partner Joseph Foster. The three had traveled from Ohio following rumors of rich placer deposits in the Sierra Nevada foothills. Daniel, a former blacksmith-turned-prospector, had invested his life savings into the venture. Foster, younger and unmarried, brought enthusiasm and a modest inheritance from a deceased aunt in Cincinnati. The Wilson cabin stood at the northern edge of the settlement, where Deer Creek curved through a grove of towering pines. Built from rough-hewn logs and chinked with mud and moss, it consisted of 2 rooms connected by a covered breezeway. Martha had fashioned curtains from flour sacks and arranged their few possessions with careful attention to domestic order. A cast-iron stove dominated one corner, its chimney pipe extending through the roof at an angle that suggested hasty installation. Joseph Foster maintained quarters in a smaller structure approximately 100 yards downstream. His cabin, constructed primarily of split logs and canvas, reflected the temporary nature most miners attributed to their California ventures. A narrow footpath connected the 2 dwellings, worn smooth by daily passage, between the claims and living areas. The partnership between Daniel Wilson and Joseph Foster appeared harmonious during their first months in Nevada County. They had registered adjacent claims along a particularly promising stretch of creek bed, where traces of gold appeared consistently in their daily panning operations. Local miners often observed the 2 men working in coordinated fashion, one operating the rocker box while the other shoveled gravel and creek sediment. Martha Wilson, 28 years old and described by neighbors as possessing sharp features and penetrating blue eyes, maintained the domestic routines expected of frontier wives. She prepared meals for both men, mended their work clothes, and tended a small vegetable garden behind the main cabin. Her interactions with other settlement wives remained cordial but limited. Several women later recalled that Martha rarely participated in communal activities such as quilting circles or Sunday gatherings. The first indication of trouble emerged during the winter months of 1855 to 1856. Heavy snowfall had made mining operations nearly impossible, forcing the men to spend long hours confined to their quarters. According to later testimony from a neighboring prospector named Henry Clark, arguments between Daniel and Joseph became audible across the frozen creek bed. The disputes appeared to center on financial matters and the distribution of their modest gold findings. Henry Clark, whose own claim bordered the Wilson-Foster partnership, reported hearing raised voices on multiple occasions during January and February of 1856. The content of these arguments remained unclear due to distance and the muffling effect of snow-laden pine boughs. However, Clark noted that the disagreements typically occurred in the evening hours and often continued past midnight. Martha Wilson's behavior during this period drew little attention from other settlement residents. She continued her daily routines without apparent change, though some neighbors observed that she had begun making more frequent trips to the general store operated by German immigrant Otto Brennan. These visits, previously limited to weekly supply purchases, became almost daily occurrences. Otto Brennan, a meticulous record keeper who maintained detailed accounts of all transactions, later provided investigators with purchase records spanning the winter and spring months of 1856. The documents revealed an unusual pattern in Martha Wilson's buying habits. Beginning in early February, she had purchased increasing quantities of patent medicines and household chemicals, including several bottles of a tonic containing arsenic compounds, marketed as a treatment for rheumatism and digestive ailments. The spring thaw of 1856 brought renewed mining activity to Deer Creek and the surrounding area. Daniel Wilson and Joseph Foster resumed their partnership operations, though observers noted a marked coolness in their interactions. The two men now worked their claims in shifts rather than together, with Daniel typically manning the equipment during morning hours, while Joseph took the afternoon period. Martha Wilson's domestic routines also underwent subtle changes during this time. She began preparing separate meals for the two men, claiming that their different work schedules made communal dining impractical. Joseph Foster, who had previously taken most of his meals with the Wilson family, now received his food delivered to his cabin or consumed it alone at the main dwelling. On April 15, 1856, Joseph Foster failed to appear for his scheduled work shift. Daniel Wilson, after waiting several hours, walked to Foster's cabin to investigate the delay. He discovered his partner lying motionless on a rough wooden cot, apparently having died during the night. The body showed no obvious signs of violence or struggle. Foster's personal effects remained undisturbed, and a small leather pouch containing gold dust sat untouched on a nearby table. Daniel Wilson immediately summoned Dr. Ephraim Morse, the nearest medical practitioner, whose office was located 12 miles south in Nevada City. Dr. Morse, a former military surgeon who had established his practice among the mining camps, arrived at the Foster cabin late in the afternoon of April 16th. His examination of the deceased revealed symptoms consistent with what he described as acute gastric distress, though the specific cause remained unclear. The death of Joseph Foster created immediate complications for the Wilson-Foster mining partnership. Local mining law required that claims be actively worked to maintain legal possession, and the loss of half the workforce threatened both men's investments. Daniel Wilson petitioned the local mining court for permission to work both claims independently, citing his partner's death as extraordinary circumstances. Martha Wilson's reaction to Joseph Foster's death appeared appropriately subdued to most observers. She assisted with preparing the body for burial and contributed food for the informal wake held in the settlement's only meeting hall. Several women noted that Martha seemed more composed than might be expected, though frontier life had taught most residents to accept sudden death without extended grieving periods. The burial of Joseph Foster took place on April 18th in a small cemetery overlooking Deer Creek. A traveling Methodist minister named Reverend Samuel Hughes conducted a brief service attended by most of the settlement's residents. The grave was marked with a simple wooden cross bearing Foster's name and the dates of his birth and death, carved by Daniel Wilson using his blacksmithing tools. Otto Brennan, the German storekeeper, mentioned to several customers during the days following Foster's death that Martha Wilson had returned unused bottles of patent medicine shortly after the burial. When asked about her reason for the return, she claimed that her husband's rheumatism had improved and the medicine was no longer needed. Brennan noted that she specifically requested cash rather than store credit for the returned items. During the weeks following Foster's death, Daniel Wilson worked both mining claims with apparent success. His daily gold recovery increased substantially, though this improvement could be attributed to working more hours rather than discovering richer deposits. The additional income allowed the Wilsons to purchase better equipment and expand their operations to include a small stamp mill for processing quartz ore. Martha Wilson began corresponding with relatives in Ohio, according to mail records maintained by the settlement's unofficial postmaster. These letters, sent at weekly intervals throughout May and June, represented a significant increase in her communication with family members. The content of this correspondence was never disclosed, though Martha mentioned to neighbors that she was considering a return visit to Ohio before the onset of another harsh winter. The first serious questions about Joseph Foster's death arose in late June, when Dr. Morse encountered similar symptoms in two other miners from different claims along Deer Creek. Both men survived their illness, but their descriptions of gastric pain, nausea, and muscle weakness matched details from Foster's final hours. Dr. Morse began to suspect that some form of contamination might be affecting the local water supply or food sources. Investigation revealed that all three affected miners had purchased supplies from Otto Brennan's store and had consumed meals prepared using ingredients from common sources. However, the pattern seemed inconsistent, as dozens of other miners used the same suppliers without incident. Dr. Morse expanded his inquiry to include questioning about any unusual substances or changes in daily routines that might explain the isolated cases of illness. Martha Wilson's name emerged during these conversations when one of the surviving miners, a Mexican prospector named Carlos Mendoza, mentioned that she had visited his camp offering to trade home-baked bread for gold dust. Mendoza had accepted the trade, but became ill several hours after consuming the food. He had attributed his sickness to spoiled meat until Dr. Morse's questions prompted him to reconsider the timeline. Dr. Morse requested permission from Daniel Wilson to examine any remaining food supplies in the Wilson cabin, citing concerns about contaminated flour or preserved meats that might be affecting multiple miners. Daniel agreed to the inspection, though he expressed confusion about why his own household would be suspected when he and Martha had remained healthy throughout the period in question. The examination of the Wilson cabin took place on July 2, 1856. Dr. Morse, accompanied by settlement leader Marcus Thompson and storekeeper Otto Brennan, conducted a thorough inventory of food stores and cooking supplies. Hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the main room, they discovered several bottles of patent medicine containing arsenic compounds, along with a small leather journal filled with Martha Wilson's handwriting. The journal entries, spanning from February through June of 1856, contained detailed observations about the effects of various substances on different individuals. Martha had recorded the quantities of arsenic-containing medicines mixed into food preparations, along with notes about the recipient's reactions and the timing of symptoms. The final entries described Joseph Foster's death and her satisfaction with the results of her experiments. Confronted with this evidence, Martha Wilson initially denied any knowledge of the journal or the hidden medicines. She claimed that the items must have belonged to Joseph Foster and somehow found their way beneath her floorboards. When Dr. Morse pointed out that the handwriting matched samples of her correspondence, Martha changed her story to claim that Foster had been threatening her and she had acted in self-defense. Daniel Wilson's reaction to his wife's exposure proved devastating to witness. According to Marcus Thompson's later account, Daniel collapsed to his knees upon hearing the journal entries read aloud. He had been unaware of any conflict between Martha and Joseph Foster, and could not comprehend how his wife had committed such methodical murder while maintaining the appearance of normal domestic life. The revelation that Martha Wilson had been systematically poisoning Joseph Foster created immediate outrage throughout the settlement. Several miners who had accepted food from Martha now realized they might have been targeted as well. Carlos Mendoza demanded that all of Martha's cooking implements be destroyed, fearing they might retain traces of poison that could affect future residents of the cabin. Martha Wilson was taken into custody by a group of miners who formed an impromptu tribunal pending the arrival of proper legal authorities from Nevada City. She was confined to a storage shed behind Otto Brennan's store, with armed guards maintaining constant watch. The makeshift jail consisted of 4 log walls, a single barred window, and a heavy wooden door secured with multiple padlocks. During her confinement, Martha Wilson provided a detailed confession to Reverend Samuel Hughes, who visited daily to offer spiritual guidance. The confession, recorded in the minister's careful handwriting, revealed that Martha had murdered Joseph Foster due to her belief that he was cheating Daniel in their business partnership. She had discovered discrepancies in Foster's accounting of their gold findings and concluded that he was stealing substantial quantities for his own benefit. The confession also revealed that Martha had contemplated poisoning other miners who she believed were taking advantage of her husband's generous nature. Carlos Mendoza had been targeted because he had borrowed tools from Daniel without offering adequate compensation. 2 other miners had received smaller doses of poison in food preparations, though neither had consumed enough to cause serious harm. Martha claimed that her actions were motivated entirely by devotion to her husband and their financial security. She expressed no remorse for Joseph Foster's death, stating that he had deserved punishment for his theft and deception. However, she acknowledged that her methods had been extreme and that she should have confronted Foster directly about the financial discrepancies. Daniel Wilson's response to his wife's confession demonstrated the complex nature of frontier justice and family loyalty. Despite his horror at Martha's actions, he publicly declared his intention to stand by her during any legal proceedings. He hired a lawyer from Sacramento to defend Martha and began selling their mining claims to raise funds for her legal expenses. The arrival of proper legal authorities from Nevada City occurred on July 15, 1856. Sheriff William Montgomery, accompanied by 2 deputies and a court clerk, formally arrested Martha Wilson on charges of murder and attempted murder. The evidence collected by Dr. Morse and the settlement leaders was transferred to official custody, including the journal, poison bottles, and written statements from witnesses. Martha Wilson was transported to Nevada City for trial in a wagon provided by Daniel Wilson. The journey, covering approximately 12 miles of rough mountain roads, took most of a day due to heavy summer rains that had made travel treacherous. Martha maintained her composure throughout the trip, though several witnesses noted that she appeared to be praying silently during much of the journey. The trial of Martha Wilson commenced on August 20, 1856, in the Nevada County Courthouse, a recently constructed wooden building that served multiple jurisdictions throughout the Sierra Nevada mining region. Judge Harrison Clark presided over proceedings that attracted observers from mining camps throughout the area. The case represented one of the first formal murder trials in the county's brief legal history. Martha Wilson's defense attorney, Samuel Morrison from Sacramento, argued that his client had acted under extreme emotional distress caused by her isolation in the harsh frontier environment. Morrison contended that Martha's actions, while inexcusable, resulted from a deteriorating mental condition exacerbated by the pressures of mining camp life and her fear of financial ruin. The prosecution, led by District Attorney James Patterson, presented the journal entries as evidence of premeditated murder and systematic attempted murder. Patterson argued that Martha Wilson had demonstrated clear intent and careful planning in her use of poison, making her crimes particularly heinous, even by frontier standards, where violence was common but rarely so methodical. Dr. Morse testified about the symptoms he had observed in Joseph Foster's body and the similar effects experienced by other miners. His testimony established that arsenic poisoning was the cause of death and linked the poison to medicines purchased by Martha Wilson from Otto Brennan's store. The doctor's medical background provided crucial scientific credibility to the prosecution's case. Otto Brennan's testimony regarding Martha Wilson's unusual purchasing patterns proved particularly damaging to her defense. The storekeeper's meticulous records showed that Martha had bought far more patent medicine than would be needed for legitimate medical purposes. The timing of her purchases, beginning shortly before Foster's death and continuing until her arrest, suggested deliberate planning rather than impulsive action. Daniel Wilson's testimony created the most emotional moment of the trial. Speaking barely above a whisper, he described his shock at discovering his wife's actions and his struggle to reconcile his love for Martha with the horror of her crimes. Daniel admitted that he had noticed tension between Martha and Joseph Foster, but had attributed it to the normal stresses of their confined living situation. Several minors testified about receiving food from Martha Wilson during the months preceding her arrest. Carlos Mendoza described his illness in detail, while others recalled declining her offers of baked goods or prepared meals. A pattern emerged suggesting that Martha had been selective in her targets, focusing on individuals she perceived as threats to her husband's financial interests. Reverend Samuel Hughes provided testimony about Martha Wilson's confession, though he expressed reluctance to betray the confidentiality of spiritual counseling. Judge Clark ruled that the confession was admissible evidence given the serious nature of the charges. The minister read portions of Martha's statement aloud, causing visible distress among courtroom observers. The defense called several character witnesses who described Martha Wilson as a devoted wife and competent homemaker who had contributed positively to the settlement community. These witnesses emphasized the challenging conditions faced by women in mining camps and suggested that Martha's crimes resulted from temporary insanity brought on by isolation and stress. Martha Wilson chose to testify on her own behalf, a decision that surprised both legal teams given the risks involved. Speaking in a clear, steady voice, she maintained that her actions had been motivated by love for her husband and determination to protect their financial future. She denied feeling remorse for Joseph Foster's death, stating that he had been stealing from their partnership and deserved punishment. The jury deliberation lasted 2 days, with 12 men from various mining camps throughout Nevada County weighing the evidence and arguments. The foreman, a veteran prospector named Thomas Bradford, later described the discussions as focusing primarily on the question of premeditation versus temporary insanity. The detailed journal entries proved crucial in establishing Martha's deliberate planning. On August 28, 1856, the jury returned a verdict of guilty on all charges against Martha Wilson. Judge Clark sentenced her to death by hanging, to be carried out within 30 days, as specified by California territorial law. The sentence reflected the serious view taken of premeditated murder, particularly involving poison, which was considered a particularly cowardly and heinous method of killing. Martha Wilson received the verdict without visible emotion, though observers noted that her hands trembled slightly as the judge pronounced sentence. Daniel Wilson, seated in the gallery, broke down completely upon hearing his wife condemned to death. Several deputies were required to escort him from the courtroom when he began shouting protests against the verdict. The execution of Martha Wilson was scheduled for September 25, 1856, in Nevada City's public square. However, significant legal complications arose when Daniel Wilson's attorney petitioned for a stay of execution based on newly discovered evidence. The petition claimed that Joseph Foster had indeed been embezzling gold from their partnership, potentially supporting Martha's claims of justification for her actions. Investigation into Foster's financial activities revealed some discrepancies in his personal accounts, though the amounts involved were relatively small and could have resulted from honest mistakes in record-keeping rather than deliberate theft. The evidence was insufficient to prove systematic embezzlement, but it raised questions about Martha's motives that had not been fully explored during the trial. Governor J. Neely Johnson reviewed the case file and Martha Wilson's petition for clemency during September of 1856. The governor's consideration included testimony from miners who supported Foster's reputation for honesty, as well as statements from those who believed Martha's claims about financial improprieties. The case had attracted attention throughout California as an example of the complex moral questions arising in frontier communities. On September 20th, 5 days before the scheduled execution, Governor Johnson commuted Martha Wilson's death sentence to life imprisonment. The commutation cited the challenging circumstances faced by frontier women and the possibility that Martha's mental state had been compromised by isolation and stress. The decision drew both praise and condemnation from various mining communities throughout the region. Martha Wilson was transported to the California State Prison at San Quentin, where she became one of the first women confined in the recently constructed facility. The prison, located on the shores of San Francisco Bay, housed both male and female convicts in separate quarters. Martha was assigned to work in the prison laundry and maintained exemplary behavior throughout her incarceration. Daniel Wilson sold his mining claims and left Nevada County shortly after his wife's conviction and sentencing. Several miners reported seeing him in various camps throughout the Sierra Nevada during the following months. Apparently searching for new opportunities, his mental state appeared to have suffered severely from the scandal, and many observers noted dramatic changes in his previously optimistic and friendly demeanor. The Wilson cabin on Deer Creek was abandoned and eventually dismantled by other miners who used the building materials for their own structures. Joseph Foster's smaller cabin met a similar fate, leaving no physical trace of the partnership or the crimes that had destroyed both families. The mining claims were eventually consolidated with adjacent properties and worked by different operators. Otto Brennan reported a significant decrease in sales of patent medicines following Martha Wilson's arrest and trial. Several miners expressed suspicion about any products containing arsenic or other potentially dangerous compounds. The storekeeper began posting written warnings about the proper use of such medicines and refused to sell large quantities to individual customers without documented medical need. Dr. Morse continued his medical practice in the Nevada City area, but became increasingly cautious about diagnosing sudden illnesses or unexplained deaths. The Wilson case had demonstrated how easily natural-appearing deaths could conceal deliberate poisoning. The doctor developed a protocol for investigating any suspicious circumstances surrounding patient deaths, though such thorough examinations were often impractical in frontier conditions. Records from the California State Prison indicate that Martha Wilson adapted well to incarceration despite the dramatic change from frontier life. She participated in educational programs offered to female inmates and reportedly learned to read and write with greater proficiency than she had possessed upon arrival. Prison officials noted her cooperative attitude and willingness to assist other inmates with various tasks. Martha Wilson's case became a subject of discussion in newspapers throughout California and other Western territories. Editorial writers debated the appropriate punishment for women who committed violent crimes, with some arguing that female criminals deserved the same harsh sentences as men, while others contended that women's alleged mental fragility required different legal considerations. The isolation and harsh conditions of mining camp life received increased scrutiny following the Wilson case. Several women's organizations in San Francisco and Sacramento called for improved support systems for frontier families, arguing that the lack of community resources contributed to incidents like Martha's descent into violence. These advocacy efforts led to expanded missionary activities in remote mining areas. Legal scholars have since analyzed the Wilson case as an early example of the challenges faced by territorial courts in establishing consistent standards for criminal justice. The commutation of Martha's death sentence reflected broader uncertainties about capital punishment and the treatment of female criminals in societies where legal precedents were still being established. Prison records indicate that Martha Wilson maintained correspondence with several relatives in Ohio throughout her incarceration, though the content of these letters was not preserved. She reportedly expressed interest in eventually returning to the Midwest if she were ever granted parole, though California law at the time made such releases extremely rare for convicted murderers. Daniel Wilson's fate after leaving Nevada County remains largely unknown. Scattered reports place him in various mining camps throughout California and Nevada during the late 1850s. But no reliable documentation confirms his activities or ultimate destination. Some sources suggest he may have changed his name to escape the stigma associated with his wife's crimes. The broader Nevada County mining community gradually recovered from the shock of the Wilson case, though the incident left lasting changes in social relationships. Miners became more cautious about accepting food from casual acquaintances, and women in the area faced increased scrutiny regarding their domestic activities. The easy trust that had characterized early frontier communities gave way to more formal and distant interactions. Modern analysis of the arsenic compounds available in 1856 California reveals that Martha Wilson's choice of poison was both readily accessible and difficult to detect without specific medical knowledge. Patent medicines containing arsenic were commonly used for various ailments and could be purchased without questions or restrictions. The delayed onset of symptoms made it challenging to link deaths to specific food sources or individuals. The case has attracted attention from historians studying frontier women and the unique stresses of mining camp life. Martha Wilson's detailed journal provides rare insight into the mental state of a woman who felt trapped by circumstances beyond her control and chose violence as a solution. Her methodical approach to murder contrasts with more impulsive frontier violence typically associated with male criminals. The absence of established social institutions in early mining camps created conditions where personal conflicts could escalate without intervention from community leaders or legal authorities. Martha Wilson's isolation from other women and her husband's focus on mining activities left her without normal support systems that might have provided alternatives to violence. The Wilson case also illustrates the complex nature of frontier partnerships and the potential for financial disputes to destroy relationships. Joseph Foster's alleged embezzlement, whether real or imagined, demonstrates how unclear business arrangements and inadequate record-keeping could create suspicions that ultimately led to deadly consequences. The techniques Martha Wilson used to administer poison reveal considerable planning and knowledge about arsenic's effects on the human body. Her journal entries suggest she may have experimented with different dosages and delivery methods before settling on the approach that killed Foster. This level of premeditation supported the prosecution's argument for first-degree murder charges. Martha Wilson died in San Quentin Prison on March 12, 1868, after serving nearly 12 years of her life sentence. Prison records indicate that she succumbed to tuberculosis, a common cause of death among 19th-century inmates due to poor sanitary conditions and inadequate medical care. She was buried in the prison cemetery without any family members present. The location of Joseph Foster's grave in the Grass Valley Cemetery remained unmarked for several decades after his death. In 1889, a group of local historians erected a simple stone marker acknowledging Foster as a victim of one of Nevada County's most notorious crimes. The marker stands today as a reminder of frontier justice and the deadly consequences of isolation and financial desperation. Contemporary accounts suggest that Martha Wilson never expressed genuine remorse for her actions, maintaining until her death that she had acted to protect her husband's interests. Her inability to comprehend the moral implications of murder reflects either genuine mental illness or the extreme hardening of conscience that frontier life sometimes produced in individuals facing impossible circumstances. The Wilson case influenced the development of criminal law in California and other Western states, particularly regarding the treatment of female defendants and the consideration of environmental factors in determining sentences. Legal precedents established during Martha's trial and appeals process affected how similar cases were handled throughout the remainder of the 19th century. The story of Martha Wilson, Joseph Foster, and Daniel Wilson serves as a stark reminder of how quickly civilized relationships could deteriorate in frontier conditions where legal protection was minimal and social support systems were virtually non-existent. The case demonstrates that the promise of gold and prosperity could transform ordinary people into desperate individuals capable of extraordinary violence. Today, the Deer Creek area where these events unfolded has been largely reclaimed by forest, with only scattered traces of mining activity remaining visible to hikers and historians. The site of the Wilson cabin can still be located by experienced guides, though nothing remains of the structures that once housed this tragic drama. Pine trees now tower over ground that once echoed with the sounds of pickaxes and human suffering. The enduring fascination with the Martha Wilson case reflects broader questions about the nature of evil and the circumstances that can drive apparently normal individuals to commit horrific acts. Her story continues to resonate with those who study frontier history and the complex psychological pressures faced by 19th century Americans pursuing dreams of wealth and prosperity in harsh and unforgiving environments. And perhaps most disturbing of all, the methodical nature of Martha Wilson's crimes suggests that beneath the veneer of domestic tranquility in even the most remote frontier communities, darkness could take root and flourish with deadly consequences that would echo through generations of California mountain folklore. The silence of those ancient pines still holds secrets that may never be fully understood. The records from San Quentin Prison, archived in 1869 following Martha Wilson's death, were transferred to the California State Archives but remained largely unexamined until 1947. A graduate student at the University of California, researching frontier women's experiences, discovered Martha's journal entries among the prison documents. The discovery provided historians with unprecedented insight into the psychological state of a 19th century murderess. The student's thesis, completed in 1948 but never published, analyzed Martha Wilson's writings for evidence of mental illness or social pathology. The analysis concluded that Martha demonstrated clear, rational thinking throughout her planning and execution of Joseph Foster's murder, undermining contemporary theories about female hysteria or temporary insanity that had influenced her original sentencing. In 1952, the last surviving resident of the original Grass Valley settlement, an elderly man named Robert Chen, whose father had worked claims near Deer Creek, provided oral testimony to local historians. Chen recalled childhood stories about the Wilson case and confirmed that fear of poisoning had persisted in the community for decades after Martha's arrest. According to Chen's account, his father had known both Daniel Wilson and Joseph Foster personally, and maintained that Foster was an honest man who would never have cheated his partner. This testimony contradicted Martha's claims about Foster's embezzlement and supported the prosecution's argument that jealousy or mental instability, rather than financial protection, had motivated the murder. The site of the Wilson cabin was excavated by amateur archaeologists in 1958, yielding fragments of pottery, metal implements, and personal items that confirmed historical accounts of the family's living conditions. Among the artifacts recovered was a small glass vial that tested positive for arsenic residue, providing physical evidence that corroborated Martha's confession and the trial testimony No trace of Joseph Foster's cabin was ever located, suggesting that it had been completely dismantled and its materials used elsewhere in the mining camp. The footpath connecting the two dwellings remained visible into the 1930s, when increased logging activity in the area obliterated the last physical remnants of the partnership that had ended so tragically. The final chapter of this dark frontier tale was written not in California's goldfields, but in the sterile corridors of San Quentin prison, where Martha Wilson spent her remaining years maintaining the same methodical attention to detail that had made her such an effective killer. Prison staff noted that she kept meticulous records of daily activities and correspondence, demonstrating the same organizational skills she had applied to murder. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of Martha Wilson's story lies not in the brutality of her crimes, but in the cold efficiency with which she planned and executed them while maintaining the facade of devoted frontier wife. Her journal entries reveal a mind capable of compartmentalizing extreme violence alongside mundane domestic concerns, suggesting a psychological profile that 19th-century observers were ill-equipped to understand. The case file was officially closed in 1868 following Martha's death, but the questions it raised about frontier justice, women's mental health, and the pressures of isolated mining life continue to intrigue historians and criminologists. The methodical nature of Martha's crimes established precedents for understanding premeditated murder that influenced California legal proceedings well into the 20th century. Today, visitors to the Nevada County Historical Society can examine copies of Martha Wilson's journal and other documents from the case, though the original materials remain in the California State Archives under restricted access due to their historical significance. The display includes a reproduction of Otto Brennan's purchase records and portions of Dr. Morse's medical testimony. The Deer Creek area has been designated as part of the Tahoe National Forest, and interpretive trails provide information about the region's mining history. A small marker near the site of the original settlement acknowledges the Wilson Foster case as one of Nevada County's most significant historical events, though it provides few details about the horrific nature of Martha's crimes. And so, the mountain silence that once concealed Martha Wilson's deadly preparations continues to guard the secrets of California's gold rush era. The dreams of fortune that drew desperate families to these remote valleys sometimes transformed ordinary people into killers, leaving behind only scattered artifacts and fading memories of a time when justice was rough, life was cheap, and a woman's quiet determination could prove more deadly than any gunfighter's rage. The creek still flows past the site where Joseph Foster died, its waters carrying no trace of the poison that ended his life or the partnership that might have brought prosperity to three people who instead found only tragedy in California's golden hills.